Hi, I want to show you how to make these children's socks made in Norwegian traditional shape and selbu pattern and with lace cuff. I actually have done this before, but in a different size and pattern design. The reason why I'm doing it again is because the last video I did went blurry in a couple places and I wanted to improve it. I also want to thank Wendy for pointing it out to me because I hadn't noticed myself. So I will show you step by step, and hopefully this video is better than the last one. For these socks I use needle size 2.5 millimeters, and the yarn I use is Drops Fabel, and that's a sock yarn made from 75% wool and the rest nylon to give it strength. And I will put this pattern and a couple other options out on my blog. Thank you for watching and good luck knitting. I will begin by casting my stitches onto 4 needles, and I have the 5th needle to knit with. And when I am knitting cuffs or other things that I want to have extra stretch, I always use this method when I cast on, and I begin by making a slip knot. And I place it onto my first needle, and then I begin. This is my first stitch. I hold my yarn in my right hand between my middle finger and my thumb, and I pinch the first stitch like this in my left hand. I use my index finger to go underneath the yarn and up. Then I twist and get a loop around my finger. With my knitting needle, I go down to the tip of my index finger, up through the loop, and I slip it onto my needle. Index finger from underneath and up, make the loop, knitting needle on top of my yarn, move down to the tip of my index finger, up again through the loop, and slip it onto the needle. I don't want to pull this too hard because it will be extremely difficult to knit in the first row. So I will just continue until I have the right amount of stitches on my first needle. As a rule, I will try to evenly distribute the stitches I need on my 4 needles, unless there's any particular reason why I shouldn't. That was one too many. Okay. When I move on to my second needle, I place it underneath the first one, and I just hold them together like this, and I just continue to cast on the same way. I make sure the first stitch on this needle ends up really close to the stitch on the last one. And now I just have to keep going until I have cast on all 4 needles. I have finished my cast on and I am ready to begin knitting, and I have the first needle I cast on in my left hand here and the last one on the right side with the working yarn over my index and middle finger like this. I make sure to place these two needles on top of the others so that I don't lock them when I knit. And in this pattern I will begin to purl the first two rows. And when I purl, I begin with my needle at the tip of my index finger. I move behind the yarn and I move up from underneath and through the first stitch, behind the yarn again, and then I bring the yarn through my stitch and I slip it off the needle, and then I move everything as close to the last stitch here as possible. And if I have tightened this stitch too much, I can loosen it a bit before I knit, because this is what happens with this method for casting on. You can easily pull the stitches when you knit the first row. This will only be a problem in your first row. After the first row is finished, it won't be an issue again, and you will have a really stretchy cuff. So again, I move behind the yarn, up through the stitch from underneath, and I bring my yarn through the stitch, slip it off the needle. So it would be easier if I had more pointy needles and tried not to pull the stitches too much. You can easily mend it also by keeping this stitch a bit loose when I have slipped it off, because then you see the gap is already a bit smaller here. And I'll just keep going until I have purled the two first rows, and the result will be like this. The edge here will be just as stretchy as the cuff itself, without being loose or saggy. Now I have finished my 2 rows of purl stitches, and I'll show you how to knit the lace pattern on the cuff. That pattern is 11 stitches, and I repeat those 11 stitches all the way throughout the row. And it goes like this. I purl the first stitch, then I knit the next 2 stitches together, then I go from underneath and up through the 2 stitches. I move to the tip of my index finger and pick up the yarn, bring it through and slip it off like this. Then I knit the 2 next stitches. I make 1 yarn over, knit 2, yarn over, knit 2, and then I knit the last 2 stitches together. So that's 1 repetition of the lace pattern. So just continue to knit these 11 stitches until you are back at the beginning of the row. In the next row you just purl the purl stitches, the first of the 11, and you knit the other 10. So and you repeat those 2 rows. 1 row of lace pattern, 1 row of purl 1 knit 10, purl 1 knit 10, and next row you make this pattern again, and next row purl 1 knit 10. So you repeat those 2 rows until your cuff has the required length, and as I have done here, you can make stripy pattern by adding the second color, and when you are satisfied with the length of the cuff, you just knit a couple rows, just plain knit stitches, and after that I will get back to you on how I make the heel. Now my cuff is finished and I will begin to knit the heel, and I will knit the heel on needle 1 and 4, the first and the last needle of my row, and I will knit gray and yellow every other stitch, and I will begin on needle 1, and I'll knit gray, yellow, gray, yellow, like this. And now I will turn my work around and I will purl my way back to the beginning of the row, and now I will begin by just slipping the first stitch, and no matter what I will always knit opposite color. So here I have a gray stitch, so I'll purl with yellow yarn. I always make sure I keep the yarn on my side of the needle when I knit from the wrong side, when I have 2 colors. Not on this side, because then the floats will end up on the right side of the work and I don't want that, so I keep the yarn here on the wrong side, and I just always keep my needle here behind the yarn, and I just pick the color I want. So I go behind the yarn, I have gray, so I pick up the yellow, and here I have yellow, so I pick up the gray, and I will do this until I get back to the beginning of the row. Here, and then I will continue to purl from the wrong side on needle 4, and I will just continue. Even though I have 2 rows of color here, and this will be the first one on this needle, I will knit according to the last color on this needle to make the pattern match when it's finished. I will explain about that later. So last here was yellow, first stitch here will be gray, and I will just knit my way, purl my way to the end of needle 4. So really just keep the floats on the wrong side and make sure you pick up every other color. So when that's finished, you turn around again to the right side and you knit your way back to the beginning of your row, which is here. I forgot to mention, but when I knit with 2 colors, I keep the bottom color, I have chosen that to be gray, I keep that closest to me, and the farthest away from me I keep the pattern color. And I'm consistent of I make sure I do not switch places, because when the color I have closest to me will be the more dominant one. If I keep changing these, the pattern will look uneven and will not be as good looking. So just keep the same color in the same place, no matter which one you choose. So when I am finishing here the second row, I slip the first stitch again and I knit opposite color. You may notice here now I have 2 yellow stitches in a row. This will correct itself the next time on the next row you knit, so don't worry about that, but it's what happened when you slip the first stitch instead of knitting it. So now when I reach the beginning, oh, I have to be careful now. To focus a little bit, not just talk. Here, I'm at the beginning of the row again, and I've now finished the 2 first rows of the heel flap, and I will continue to do this operation until I have 14 rows. So to make the heel flap even, when I begin the 3rd row, just make sure to avoid this. Knit and just make sure the stitch goes close to the last one. Put some tension on it and the second one, and then you can knit in an ordinary manner. And I will get back to you when it's time to turn the heel. Now I have finished my heel flap, and if I count here, I have 14 rows. Of course, this about 14 rows, that's only for the pattern I am knitting now. You should watch the pattern you are using to make the correct amount of rows here. But the way of doing it is the same. So my next step will be to make the angle of the heel. And when I do, I begin, and I was about to explain about knitting the beginning here. That I knitted every other stitch here, even though I have one row to this side, so that this is row number 1 and here's the beginning of the row, and number 2 is here. I do not adjust for it. I just keep going every other stitch to otherwise you will end up with 2 gray and 2 yellow and 2 gray and 2 yellow here. So to keep the pattern, when you go back here on the wrong side, you just keep going every other color. But now to make the angle, on the number of stitches you have to check with your pattern, but for this one I knit 4 stitches, like this, and then I knit the next, no, that's the right color, 4 stitches, and I knit the next 2 stitches together like this, and I knit 1 more. Now I have 2 gray, but I always knit the opposite color no matter, and then I turn. And as I did before, okay, I have to organize my yarn here. So I slip the first stitch and I purl my way back. It can be tricky sometimes because the yellow color is on the wrong side here, so I have to bring it over. But this you have to just do the way you find more suitable. So like this, and then I keep going back to the beginning of the row in the exact same way as I did on the heel flap. Like this. And I do the same the other way on needle 4. I purl 4 stitches, then I purl 2 together and 1 more. Then I turn my work back round to the right side and I organize my yarn. And I slip the first stitch and I knit my way back to the beginning of the row. And you can now see that I have created a gap here and a gap here. So now I will, the operation I just showed you, I will repeat this, but now I will knit until I'll knit the 5 first stitches, the 2 stitches here making the gap, the last one before the gap and the first one after it, those I will knit together, and then I knit the next one before I turn. And when I purl on the other side, I purl the 5 stitches, the last one before the gap and the first one after the gap. I purl those 2 together and I purl the next one, and then I turn and knit back to the beginning of the row. I keep going until I knit together the 2 stitches here on the edge. When those 2 are the first stitch before and the last one before and the first after the gap. When those are knitted together and I'm back here at the beginning, then I am finished and ready for the next step. Now I'm finished with angling or turning the heel. I have closed the last gap here in the sides. I ended up here, this is the beginning of the row, and I have just begun to knit my first needle. So next step now is to pick up stitches on each side of the heel so that I can connect my knitting with needle 2 and 3 so that I can make the foot. So for this pattern I will pick up 10 stitches, but this will be individual and according to the pattern you are using. So when I pick up the stitches, I just find some placed along the side here, and I pick up some yarn, and if I put it on this needle, now it's ready to knit. But if I knit it this way, I have a gray stitch here, so I want a yellow one. If I just knit it the way it is, I will make a big hole here. So what I do is that when I have picked it up, I stick my needle in this way so that you can see I twist it here, and now I can knit and I will have no hole. Someone's at the door. And I'll pick up, here I have the next one. I'll twist that one as well, like this. And I'll keep going like this until I am until I arrive here at my next needle and I have picked up 10 stitches. Now I have picked up my 10 stitches and my work is now connected here, and I will continue to knit on needle 2. I want to bring my yellow yarn along. For this row you could either just cut it off and begin again on the other side. What I do is to bring my knitting needle to the tip of my index finger behind my yellow yarn. I pick up the gray and go back and through the stitch. It's now twisted, so I have to twist it back. And now I can knit a few more stitches. Then I go again behind the yellow yarn to pick up the gray. Oh, once again. And I knit and I untwist my stitch. And if you look here on this side, you can see that I attach the yarn so that I can bring it along without making just a big loose thread on the wrong side. So I will just keep going. I will do the same on needle 2 and needle 2 and 3. When I am done with needle 3, I will pick up 10 stitches here as I did on the other side, and I will knit the remaining stitches on my last needle so that I end up at the beginning of my row again. Now I have finished picking up stitches on both sides of the heel. I have also distributed my stitches so that on needle 1 and 4 I only have the stitches for the sole of the foot, and on needles 2 and 3 here I only have the stitches for the side bands and the main pattern. So first I begin knitting my heel and foot pattern. Including the stitches I picked up. And when I reach the 2 last stitches on needle 1, I knit those 2 stitches together like this. And on needle 2 I begin by knitting my side band, gray, yellow, gray, and I continue on the main pattern. Occasionally I will just stretch it to make sure I don't knit or that I don't pull the floats too tight. I continue the main pattern on needle number 3. Here, and I have my 3 remaining stitches for the side band: gray, yellow, gray. So the side bands will be knitted the same way all the time. And now I have only needle 4 to go, and I will do the same. I will knit the 2 first stitches together. If you may be noticing that when I knitted these 2 together, I put my needle through the stitches from the left, and when I did it on the other side, I did it from the right. It's to make the stitches that I knit together angle towards the top of the foot. And now only thing I have left is to keep knitting this foot pattern until I get to the beginning of the row. And I will continue to decrease like this on each side. It will be the first 2 stitches on needle 4 and the last 2 stitches on needle 1 that I will be knitting together until I have the right amount of stitches left for the foot. What the right amount is will be depending on your pattern. For my pattern, I think it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So I will have to get rid of these 3. So, but check your pattern if you are knitting a different one than this. So after I have finished my decreases, I will just continue to knit the foot of the sock until it is time to decrease for the toe. And I will get back to you on how to do that. So now I have finished the foot and I'm ready to begin my decreases for the toe. I want the toe to look like this, and I will have one way of decreasing when I want my decreases to move from the left towards the right, and I have another way of doing it when I want the opposite, from the right and towards the left. So I'll show you both. And again, I'm here at the beginning of the row, and I begin to knit my pattern, and I will do so until I have 2 stitches remaining before the side band, like this. And here I want the decrease that moves from the left and towards the right, so I will knit the first of those 2 stitches. I will slip it back onto the left needle, and then I slip the last stitch over the one I just knitted, and then I put it back onto this needle. And you may have noticed I knitted gray over gray. That is because I want this piece here to be every second stitch yellow and gray. So if you're not sure which color to pick when you get to this point, you just try, and then you do the decrease, and if you see that you don't get every other color as I do here, but you get the same color 2 stitches in a row, then you just have to change the color of when you knit the second to last stitch. And so I knit the side band, gray, yellow, gray. Make sure you do not knit this too loose, because then the result will not be as good, because it will it will easily get a bit loose when you're decreasing. So make sure to keep these 3 stitches a little bit tight. So now I will have a decrease that goes from the right and towards the left. Then I slip the first stitch, I knit the second. Now I knit yellow over yellow because no, I don't. Now I knit my main pattern. So I have to pay attention to what I'm doing, not just talk. And then now I have slipped this stitch, I knitted the next, I take the stitch I slipped and I slip it back over the one I knitted. And then I can keep going with my pattern. And again I knit the second. I almost did it wrong again because I'm already here at my side band. So these 2 are my last stitches. I knit the first, place it back on my left needle, and I slip the last stitch over back onto my right needle. Knit, this is not a good day for me. I knit the side band and tighten a bit. And I slip the first stitch, and now I want yellow and gray every other time. So now I have made my first row of decreases, 4 decreases in each row until you have only on this side, when you have only the side bands and the middle, 1 stitch in the middle left, then it is time to finish, and I will get back to you on how you do that. Thank you very much for bearing with this nonsense I'm talking today. I have finished my decreases and I have only the middle stitch left in the main pattern, and when I'm finished with that stitch I do not bother finishing the row because I don't want the toe of my sock to be more pointy than necessary. So I have cut my yarn and I just pick one of the yarn ends to knit with, and I begin with my next needle here, which is the side band, and I just knit all the stitches, but when I have slipped it off the needle I just pull the yarn end through like this. So I keep going As you can see, I have some more remaining stitches on the underside, the sole of the sock, but that's okay. It will just make the sock a bit less pointy in the toe. So I just move around all my remaining stitches. Like this. So now if I put my hand inside the sock here, you can see here I have a small hole just at the tip of the toe. I will bring both my yarn ends through that hole like this. And I will carefully tighten those on the wrong side here. And I'll just turn the sock back to the right side, and there I have my toe. So now only thing is left is to attach all loose ends, and I have my 2 socks. Thank you.